Breaking this morning, Hurricane Helene roars ashore. The monster system now a tropical storm as it moves up through Georgia. But not before slamming Florida's Big Bend as a historic Category 4 storm, bringing devastating storm surge and winds of up to 140 miles an hour.
I can tell you that we have had intermittent moments of really powerful gusts, and we're getting some right now again. Whistling inside the hotel as well. Anyone who is out here, presumably not a first responder, and should not be out on the roads. These winds are really picking up right now. We got some debris flying. We're going back inside, guys. We're going to head back in.
Flooding remains a serious issue across Florida, with at least 40 people pulled from high water in Pasco County alone. That's just north of Tampa. Well, the sheriff of Taylor County offered a grim warning to people who rode out the storm.
Wow. He asked them to write their name and birthday on their body in permanent markers so they could be identified in a worst-case scenario. This is video from Steinhatchee in Taylor County, where you can see the water reaching the roofs of some homes. So far, the devastating impact has led to at least 3 deaths.
And this morning, nearly 2 million people in Florida and Georgia are without power after ferocious winds knocked down power lines. Good morning. Good to have you with us on this busy Friday. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Christine Romans. And we have a team coverage of this historic storm. And in just a few minutes, we're going to get the latest track from meteorologist Angie Lassman and talk to the police chief of hard-hit Perry, Florida. But we begin with NBC News correspondent Marissa Parra in Tampa. Good morning, Marissa. Can you give us an idea of what things were like at the height of this storm yesterday and what kind of damage you're seeing this morning?
Hey guys, so I can tell you right now that it is going to take some time. When the sun comes up, I think we're going to learn that this is a whole lot worse than we can tell right now. And a lot of what we're learning, by the way, of course, is through social media videos, including coming from Steinhatchee. And so I'm going to get to that in just a moment. But let me talk to you about what I can see right now behind me. So we're in downtown Tampa. The water was, by the way, I spoke to neighbors who live around here. The water was taller than I am if I were to be standing at the edge of the street. What you can see is the water hasn't fully receded. You can see the reflection of the stop sign over there. But I want to take you to video of what we're getting overnight. We are seeing water rescues happening as we speak, and this is across the region. We know that this is happening in places like Pinellas County, that is a peninsula. We know that many people have had fires. We know that fire and rescue has responded to homes on fire. That is because they did not turn off their electric or gas lines before their homes flooded. This is something that authorities were asking people to do. We know that there is significant damage in Steinhatchee, which I just mentioned. Some of these really small towns that are not really equipped for this. This is now the 3rd hurricane and obviously the most significant hurricane to hit in 13 months, guys. And of course, we're going to hear more from our meteorologists on that. But Steinhatchee, we know, took significant damage. I just spoke to the mayor of Horseshoe Beach. And of course, like I said, we do not know the full scope of the damage, but he said that so far, from what he can tell, it is catastrophic. And so it is sobering right now to hear that before the sun has even come up. And of course, we're still waiting to find out the full scope of it as Helene continues to work its way up through the states here. We know that there are water rescues happening in Georgia. We know there are fatalities, at least 4 confirmed. There was a sign that fell on a car here in Tampa. There were a tree that fell on a firefighter's car in Georgia. 2 other fatalities as a result of a tornado. And unfortunately, I'm told from several different authorities, they do believe that there will be more. But I will point something out. Among those rescues, there's an incredible image just off the coast of Sanibel Island. I want to take you to what we saw, a selfie of a man and his dog. His sailboat had sunk just 25 miles off of Sanibel Island. You see that image in the background behind him. That is the U.S. Coast Guard chopper coming in to rescue him. So, guys, in terms of what we're learning, I will say that so many of the people that I spoke to yesterday who said that they were not evacuating, they told me when I followed up with them last night, many of them were surprised to find homes with water at levels they never expected. There was one woman who told me that she wasn't able to evacuate her mobile home. I followed up with her last night, and she sent me a video of the water starting to creep into her home, and I'm waiting to hear back from her. But I think there's going to be a lot of stories of exactly that. People who had a lot more damage than they were expecting, guys.
All right, Marissa Power, thank you so much.
Joining us now for more is Police Chief Jamie Cruz. He is the chief of police at the Perry Police Department. That's in the heart of Florida's Big Bend, where Helene came ashore overnight. Chief, good to have you with us. What's the situation like in Perry this morning? What reports are you getting?
Right now, you know, the sun is starting to rise. We're starting to get the first glimpse of what we actually have laying on the ground and what we're going to be dealing with. We've got helpers everywhere now doing a first push through to try to see what we need to do to clear these roads to get assets and resources in here that we desperately need to serve our communities.
Still a very dangerous situation. You know, Perry, located in Taylor County, and the Taylor County Sheriff's Office issued that grim warning to residents, asking the people who did not evacuate to write their name on their bodies so they could be identified. It's been more than 6 hours since the storm hit. Are you able to respond to emergency calls at this point?
Yeah, wind speeds have dropped enough that we are responding. We have been responding this morning. We have got some initial roadways cleared so we can get through to serve and respond to any emergencies that come up. The only regret I have at this moment is we weren't aggressive enough in the notifications to tell people to evacuate the areas that were prone to flooding. I just hope that when we finally discover what we're dealing with, that we don't have a big loss of life.
Do you have any idea how high the waters have gotten so far?
Initial reports that I got this morning were at least 15 foot in some of the coastal areas. That's well outside of the service area or jurisdiction that I serve. But we do assist the sheriff's office here daily in operations. I'm sure that we'll be down there helping with that just as soon as we can safely get into those areas.
I mean, 15 feet of water, what do you fear is going to be the impact of that?
Oh, widespread, you know, damage and destruction. You know, this is a low shelf area along the coast. There's almost 70 miles of coastline in this county alone. There's a lot of smaller communities that don't have a lot of resources that will be checking on the residents.
Chief, what's the housing like in those areas where you have this 15-foot high water? I mean, these are single-story homes. I mean, that sounds like a very dangerous combination.
It's a coastal community, so a lot of those are single-story homes on stilts. But like I said earlier, you know, that's not the service area that we customarily respond to. That's just from my personal visits there in my off time.
Chief, obviously you have a long day ahead and perhaps many long days ahead. What's your primary message to people in your city and your county right now? You know, times may look desperate. You may feel that you're in despair. Just focus on the helpers. You know, I don't mean to sound cliche in this, but focus on the helpers. We're here. We're going to continue to do our job. Just stay out of our way. We have got to take care of the problems and work every problem individually and independently to make sure that we're working safely and that all the residents and citizens that are in our community are safe as well. All right. Police Chief Jamie Cruz, thank you for your time this morning. We're thinking of you and your community right now.
All right, for much more information on Hurricane Helene, where it's been, where it's going, and what to expect, let's check in with your Morning News Now weather.
Meteorologist Angie Lastman is here. Angie, good morning.
Hi, guys. Busy morning. Of course, last night we saw that a hurricane come ashore as a Category 4 around 11:20 just to the southwest of Perry, Florida, as you heard there, Taylor County. We're still seeing this system kind of moving at a rapid pace, so it's held itself together pretty good between now and landfall. We've still got winds at 70 miles per hour. It's cruising right along parts of the southeast. And for folks in the state of Florida, in southern Georgia, we're going to slowly see some of these major improvements when it comes to the rainfall, when it comes to the winds as the system lifts to the north. But we've got a whole lot of rain to talk about, and we've got the potential for tornadoes today. So those are kind of just the couple of things that we're going to turn our attention to as far as the impacts go. When you look at those tornado watches, they're centered across parts of just a sliver of Georgia into South Carolina and parts of southern North Carolina as well. Those are going to go through at least 8 o'clock this morning. We've already seen some of those kind of ramping up as the morning has gone on with the tornado warnings. And those ingredients aren't going to change, especially with kind of the spin that you get with these systems. Notice how this is coming on shore. And this is where we're seeing some of those tornado warnings. But the rain has been quite impressive. Remember, before this storm even made landfall, we were seeing rain across this region. We've had multiple inches in some spots at 7 to 10 inches of rain, and numbers even higher than that, closer to 15, before this even got started. And in a short amount of time, so 12 to 24 hours receiving all of that rain, the grounds are just essentially saturated. And when you have some of this heavier rain already working through and moving over these saturated grounds, places like Augusta up into Charlotte, that's where we get these flash flood emergencies that are ongoing this morning. This is going to be something that we see specifically across the western portions of the Carolinas unfolding through the day today. Not to mention, we have something in meteorology called orographic lift. What is that? Sounds complicated. Basically, it's when you get a push of air going up an elevation on that side of the mountain, and it cools the air. And essentially, it has to wring the atmosphere out. And you can see we've got plenty of moisture with this atmosphere to wring out. So that means more precipitation. That means more of these landslides, these mudslides on these grounds that just essentially can't handle it at this point. Not to mention any rivers, streams, creeks that are already very swollen and with water just essentially nowhere to go. Some of the heaviest rain right now, Greenville to Greenwood. You see Asheville getting in on this as well, out towards Charlotte, Columbia, seeing some of that rain as well. So no surprise that we've got a good chunk of this region under these flash flood warnings, but also a broader area for the flash flood watch. 34 million people. Many of these, again, flash flood emergencies, really dire situation. We will see likely rescues in these areas, washed out roads, et cetera, with this kind of situation continuing to unfold through the morning hours. And you can see the spots that we're watching, that western area of parts of the Carolinas, as well as western Tennessee, where we've got moderate risk and high risk kind of centered across this region. But really, you could see flooding all across that area. Again, just so much moisture for us to tap into, and anywhere from another 3 to 5 and even up to 6 inches of rain, of additional rain on what we've already received, is going to be problematic for folks. This is going to go for the river flooding probably into next week. We've seen impressive levels of the creeks and rivers so far, and more to come. There's the 70-mile-per-hour kind of a setup of what we've got right now. The system doesn't look great. It's weakening, of course. It's interacting with the land, so that means that we're going to continue to see this thing kind of weaken through the day today. But all of those impacts really haven't changed. One thing to note, we'll slowly start to see the storm surge kind of improve in places like Tampa, of course, as the system gets farther away. But it's going to take a little while for that water to recede, especially if you still have those onshore winds with that water kind of still being pushed up against the coast. Of course, not as strong as it has been over the past 24 hours. But nonetheless, that's going to be something that we'll have to watch. There's the tornado watch that's going to stay in effect. And we do have that one warning just to the south and west of Myrtle Beach. We'll be seeing, again, this kind of setup all morning long with these bands kind of spinning on in. This is just essentially what you get when you have those outer bands working their way in. Easy for us to see some of those tornadoes popping up, and they potentially could be rain wrapped. That means that it's going to be fast moving and you're not going to be able to see it all that well. So that's why this is going to be a dangerous area too, from Norfolk out to Charlotte, down to Charleston, out towards the coast, Wilmington, Myrtle Beach, all included in this, Fayetteville as well. The winds, not as impressive as what they were, of course, when the system came ashore, and it was a Category 4. We were dealing with reports of 100-plus mile-per-hour winds in places like Perry. So the damage there, even in places like Tallahassee, a little more than what we're going to see across Georgia, but still 67-mile-per-hour wind gusts recently in Macon. We've got Atlanta gusting to 60 miles per hour. So at the very least, we'll see still some down power lines, down trees. About 50 miles per hour is when we usually see power outages. And you can see this includes most of this region, Charlotte, Greenville, Augusta, out towards the coast, of course. We'll be watching for that as well. Anywhere from 30 to 50 mile per hour winds for Knoxville. Louisville ends up about 40 to 60 miles per hour. And even Indianapolis will be gusting at tropical storm strength as this system continues to weaken. It is going to weaken, but the power outages, again, will be probably more isolated to scattered across that region as we get into the Ohio Valley. But they'll be out there with any of these winds happening. morning. So this is going to be something that we watch, guys, through at least the next couple of hours, specifically as it weakens and as it works up that way. We'll be watching for the potential for more flooding, those tornadoes, and the winds. The good news is places like Tampa Bay, which saw record storm surge, those will start to see some improvements as the morning goes on, and we'll really get to see what that damage has in store for us here as the daylight hours come.
A big day. Angie, thank you so much.
We turn now to overseas news. In the latest on the conflict in the Middle East, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu instructed the IDF on Thursday to keep fighting, quote, with full force in Lebanon. This, even as the U.S. and its allies keep pushing for a temporary ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel.
Thursday, Israel launched a new wave of attacks on southern Lebanon, targeting a Hezbollah commander in Beirut. Days of attacks have killed more than 600 people and displaced hundreds of thousands in the region. Last night, Netanyahu walked back on his dismissal of a Lebanon ceasefire, saying he, quote, shares the aims of the U.S.-led initiative for a 21-day ceasefire in Lebanon. But he released the statement only in English and only on his Facebook page. The Prime Minister is scheduled to speak to the UN General Assembly later this morning.
NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez joins us now from Tel Aviv with the latest. Raf, good morning. So tell us more about these latest strikes on southern Lebanon.
Well, Joe, the Israeli Air Force continuing to pummel what it says are Hezbollah, military installations all across southern Lebanon. Many of these strikes happened in the early hours of this morning. Families were sleeping. Southern Lebanon, there's no sirens to go off. There's no warning. There's very little in the way of bomb shelters. And Lebanese authorities are saying a number of women and children are among those who were killed in the early hours of today. Now, last night, Israel struck in the southern suburbs of Beirut. They say they took out yet another senior Hezbollah commander, this time the head of Hezbollah's drone unit, the latest senior official to be killed in these Israeli assassinations in the southern suburbs of Dahya. And guys, we were up in the northern Israeli city of Haifa earlier today. The sirens started going off as Hezbollah fired several dozen rockets into the area. There were no casualties reported, but Israel striking back pretty hard. At this point, we are not seeing any sign that Israeli ground forces are getting ready to cross the border, but we know that that threat is hanging in the air. Guys?
What can we expect from Prime Minister Netanyahu's address to the UN General Assembly later today?
Well, Christine, I think we're going to hear similar language to what we've been hearing over the last week or so. Netanyahu will say that it was Hezbollah that started this conflict on October 8th by firing into northern Israel, that Israel, like any other country, has the right to defend itself, and that Israel is acting to restore conditions of safety so that its tens of thousands of displaced civilians can return to their homes. We should note that while it was Hezbollah who fired first, it's Hezbollah who's been firing these the last 11 months. It was Israel that has escalated in a major way over the last week or so, and it is likely that we may see protests in New York at the civilian death toll, both in Lebanon and in Gaza, and possibly a lot of criticism from fellow world leaders gathered at the United Nations.
So, Raf, I mean, when we look at this statement by Netanyahu saying Israel shares the aims of this temporary ceasefire pushed by America and allies, is there a sense that it signifies a change in position, that an agreement could be reached before this conflict between Israel and Hezbollah escalates?
Joe, nothing we're seeing on the ground indicates that we are getting any closer to a ceasefire. My read on this statement from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is he is slightly trying to appease what is a pretty frustrated White House. The U.S., along with France, worked very hard this week to try to get the outlines of this proposal together. They say they kept the Israelis in the loop at all stages. And then when they made it public, Netanyahu seemed to indicate he had no interest in this ceasefire at all. And you heard the White House spokesman, John Kirby, saying, we don't know if Netanyahu's doing this for political reasons. We don't know if he's doing this for operational reasons in terms of the military response in Lebanon. But the White House clearly frustrated. It may be that the Israeli government feels that it needs to somewhat walk back. But at this point, every indication is that Israel is planning to push ahead with this military offensive and that they plan to try to change the dynamic through force. Guys.
Raf, thank you so much. Turning now to the race for the White House, both candidates are sparring over the war in Ukraine. Vice President Harris met with President Zelensky yesterday and reaffirmed her support for Ukraine.
Meanwhile, former President Trump says the government is spending too much money on a war that doesn't align with U.S. interests. NBC News correspondent Garrett Hake has more.
Vice President Harris standing side by side with Ukraine's President Zelensky.
My support for the people of Ukraine is unwavering.
Accusing former President Trump of wanting Ukraine to surrender.
There are some in my country who would instead force Ukraine to give up large parts of its sovereign territory. They are not proposals for peace. Instead, they are proposals for surrender.
Trump responding.
It's not a surrender. What my strategy is to save lives. I'll meet with President Zelensky and we'll see what happens, but I believe I can work that out.
And saying he can still work with Iran, despite his campaign saying U.S. intel briefed him on Iranian assassination threats. Would you try to make a deal with Iran of some kind if you were reelected?
Sure, I would do that. Yeah, I believe in getting. It doesn't matter. I have a great memory, but it's a memory that wants to serve the people.
Meanwhile, the former president slamming Harris before her second trip to the southern border in 4 years.
Kamala Harris will be visiting the southern border that she has completely destroyed.
Trump blaming Harris for the record over 10 million migrant crossings since she and President Biden took office.
She keeps talking about how she supposedly wants to fix the border. Why didn't she fix it almost 4 years ago?
Harris dismissing Trump's complaints after he directed Republicans to block a bipartisan border bill this year, which he said wasn't tough enough.
He killed a bill that would have actually been a solution because he wants to run on a problem.
Our thanks to Garrett Hake for that report. Former President Trump is campaigning in the critical battleground state of Michigan today, where absentee ballots have been mailed out.
As Garrett's piece mentioned, Harris is planning to visit the southern border in Arizona for the first time in 3 years as she tries to convince voters she is the best candidate to handle immigration.
Ever since she entered the race, Republicans have attacked her record on immigration and border security.
Yeah, with that in mind, we want to bring in NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. Monica, good morning. This is the vice president's first border visit since kickstarting her presidential campaign, but just the second during her term in office. Does her campaign recognize that this issue is a real point of vulnerability for her?
Yeah, and this is certainly a political vulnerability that has been a challenge for Vice President Harris throughout her years in office, ever since President Biden asked her to try to address the root causes of migration. This has been a definite political vulnerability. And you mentioned that border visit back in 2021. After that, she spent time trying to travel and engage with leaders from the Northern Triangle countries and other aspects to try to address this from the perspective of the Western Hemisphere. But there was always this pressure and questions about when she would return to the border and how she would talk about that and navigate it. So today, she is expected to go down there and really focus on what role Donald Trump played in tanking that bipartisan border bill that they had tried to get across the finish line. Expect her to be talking about that in great detail when she does visit Douglas, Arizona, a couple of hours from now, saying that that's something that if she's elected president, she wants to bring back. But of course, the reality check on that is that it would require enough support in Congress to do that. And we already saw how that failed last time, even when Donald Trump wasn't in office, but it was something that he was suggesting his fellow Republicans tried to dismiss.
So, Monica, when we look at a recent NBC News poll with registered voters, immigration is one of the top issues for both candidates. Well, former President Trump's best results came from confidence in securing the border. Voters also heavily favored Vice President Harris on protecting immigrants' rights. So with just over a month to go until the election, what's her message going to be today?
And the campaign has said that in recent weeks they have seen a little bit of a shift, whereas former President Trump did have the advantage by something like 35 points in some of these polls when it came to immigration and border security. They feel they've been able to tighten that to around 21 or 20 points. So they feel like that needle could be moving a little bit more in their direction, which they are pleased to say, according to Harris campaign advisors. But today she's also going to go out there and talk about her record when she was the California State Attorney General or when she was a senator, and specifically focus on things like fentanyl or other drugs that are crossing the border. So she's going to broaden this out and say, here are the things where I feel I was tough
on this issue. Here's what I would do if I were to be in the Oval Office. But again, this is certainly an issue where they know that the messaging is a big battle, that at times former President Trump certainly has the edge on when it comes to this public polling.
Sure. All right, Monica at the White House, thank you. This morning, there are growing calls for New York Mayor Eric Adams to step down following his federal indictment.
We are breaking down the charges he's facing and what it means for the leader of the nation's largest city. Next.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.